What's going on, everybody? James here from Artofficial Entertainment, and today we're going to be taking a quick look at the action modifications for the Quick Start Guide of the Dynamic Parkour Trace System, version 3. So let's go ahead and dive in. Alright, so I've created a bit of a modified playground area here with this platform that we created in the last video. So we've got some areas that we can just slide through, dive under, as well as some tic-tac spots. So a lot of the action stuff is going to be realistically inside of the modification for the selector. So in this case, we'll go ahead and open up under DPTS assets, selection tables from ground state, and we're going to take a look at the vault mantle selection table. Now, if I add a new row in here, just to give us a blank one to take a look at, if we look at the action modifications, I kind of talked about these a little bit, but we have the ability to assign animations to only be selected if these values are have been found to be true. So for example, we have a sidewall left and right here to be able to set up things like tic-tac actions. So if I were to, for example, to set the sidewall left into here, I can use this and it will only be selected if sidewall left has been found. So this is the first way that we can modify things. Now we also have the secondary modifications here as well, where we have another element of the same listing, and we can set a match value. So for example, sidewall left and sprint could be used as the condition for this particular animation to be selected. Now beyond the sidewalls, we also have these enclosure options here, which range from a series of values. So we have any, which means that it's going to be height and or width. All, meaning that it's going to be height and width. So something like this would be considered all, because both left, right, and up and down is bit of a smaller area. And then enclosed none is just it's an open space. And then you can also set if it's specifically width or height blocked. So you can use these values to really kind of select a variety of different actions. But the other way that we can do things is if we open up into our character, which for me is the BP third person character. We also have this over under selector inside of the system overrides, where in the last video we set it to under, but we can actually dynamically set this as well to give us a bit of a change in how actions are going to be selected. So there's some things inside of the actual selector themselves in the data table, and there's some things that we can also use that are going to be input based. So inside of our character blueprint here, if we navigate to anywhere, with some empty space, we're going to first do a keyboard event, and we're going to look for keyboard event left control. At least that's what I'm going to use. Now, obviously, you can use, your own custom input using the enhanced input system, but I'm just going to use the left control here. Now, if we grab our parkour system here, pull off, and type in set over under, we can set the over under selection, like I was saying, from an input instead of having it set to just a standard default value. Now, with this selected here, I can actually control D to duplicate it to get another one, and then hook this one up off of released. Now, what I want to do is whenever I press the button here, I'm going to set it to under, and whenever I release, I'm going to set it to over. Now, basically what this is going to mean is that I'm defaulting to over, which means that in the parkour system here, under the system overrides, I'm going to want to make sure the over under selection is set to over by default. Now, if I compile and save, there we go. We have our first input modification created. Now, we're also going to set up the sprint key as well. So a way that we can do this really simply is if we just take this input, control D and duplicate it, go into the details, input key, and I'm going to just set this to left shift. Now, if you have your own sprint input, you can obviously just put this right into there, but because I don't have an input for this yet, I'm just going to create one. And if I grab a reference to my parkour system here, and then we're going to type in set sprint, and you can see that it's just a simple Boolean value. While it might be named sprint, the one thing I do want to note is that it's just a simple Boolean match. So you can use this under really any condition. It doesn't have to be for sprinting. I just figured it was a really good, at least initial Boolean that we can use. And if pressed, we're going to set to true. And if released, we're going to set to false. So now with our input modifications into our system here, what we're going to do is go back to our selector here. And I'm going to clear out the secondary modification here though. And we have sidewall left here. Now, if I had a montage selection here, and if I search tic-tac, you can see that I have this tic-tac L vault montage. Now I set up a few things before I started the video because it's all using the same practices that I had shown in the other one. But I'll show you these really quickly where in this particular action, we are going off to the side. Now in this instance, we are using for the root motion modifier, the sidewall underscore L for our target. And then we're just moving the actor under the primary offsets 80 units off to the right. Then we're finding a land target and then just going to that land target. Resetting the action to 0.02 blend time, and that's really it. And then if I look at the right side here, it's the exact same thing. Only difference being is that my root motion modifier here is sidewall underscore R, and my offset is instead of a positive value, it is a negative value. So inside of the selector here, I'm just going to add the two compare values here. Minimum for height, I'm going to set to between 50 and 150. And then for the index here, we'll go for the length between 10 and 50. With this setup here, we've basically said we only want this to trigger if sidewall left side has been found, if it's within the compare values that we have set for 50 and 150 on the height and 10 and 50 on the length. And just to clarify, this is coming in from our values that we put into the anim selector here. So if I go ahead and save, minimize, and I hit play, and I go up to, for example, this wall here, you can see that we are now doing the tic-tac action. Purely just by putting a montage into the montage section, applying the sidewall left, and giving it some compare values. And realistically, I can just as easily, if I add another value into here, add the two compare values, and actually I can steal by shift right clicking on the compare values of index 2. I can just shift left click, on the compare values for the new index, and it'll just paste them right in there. Now for the modifications here, I'm just going to go sidewall right, and then open up under the montage section here, and then we'll use the tic-tac R vault. And there we go. So now, if I were to come at it from this side, just to make sure I'm at the right side of the wall, I can now do a tic-tac from the right side. So we can go left side and right side now, and all we did is just put the animation inside of the selector and give it some values. Now I know, granted I also did set up the warping off screen, but like I said, it's just assigning a target, giving it some offsets, and you can always take a look at what targets are what using those nice debug spheres that are going to show up whenever you do an action. So you can see here we got height, length, and sidewall, initial. Now next, let's take a look at how we would use those input calls that we set up in our character. So if we open up the DPTS assets, selection tables from ground state, we're going to open up the fault mantle selection here, and we're going to add a new element, and then we'll take the compare values, and I'm going to set up a variation of a vault. So for my vaults, I've been setting them up to be a minimum of 40, maximum of 150 for the height, and then for the length, it was between 10 and 50. Alright, so now that I got my compare values in place, what I'm going to do is under the action modifications here, we have the primary modification and that sprint value. Now inside of our character, we had set up that sprint to be true when we hit left shift and false when we release. So now in this instance, we can actually use that to select another type of animation. So if I go into the montage section here, and I have this monkey vault that I had set up. Now, just like I had said before, these are set up using the same principles that I had shown you, where we're going up to the height point, finding a land target, starting from the length, going forward, all that good stuff, and then he's just going to the land point here, and then resetting the action. So the only difference is that this animation carries a little bit more velocity, right? So what we can use that for is if we were actually sprinting, moving faster, then we can use this value to be able to select from certain animations that might have a little bit more velocity in them. So just with that created, if I minimize here, and I hit play, and I make sure I'm not near the sidewall. If I don't press the shift key, you can see he just does the standard vault, but if I press shift, you can see that he's doing the monkey vault now. So this is another way that we can modify action selection using that simple boolean. Now, to be able to do something like the slide or like a dive through a window here, this is where the enclosure values come into place. So if we take a look at, for example, I have this dive roll vault montage here. And you can see that he's kind of diving through an area. Now, just to show you the warp setup here is that I'm using from here to where right about he gets to the full dive. I'm using that and I'm getting the height point. Now, I'm not modifying anything. My offsets are all zeroed out. But then I'm finding a land target and then I'm moving to that land target right around when he hits the end of root motion. Then he's just kind of rolling along and resets. But we can use this animation really easily. If we go into the vault mantle selection, add an element, and then for our compare values, we'll set it to basically the same as the vault event. So between 40 and 150, and then the length will be between 10 and 50. And then for the action modifications here, we'll go under the primary modification, and we'll just set this to enclosed any. So if it's any enclosure of any kind, then we're going to want to do this action. And if we add an element, we can then take the dive roll vault here and put that right in. So now once again, all we did was assign some values, assign the modification, and this is after, you would want to set up the warp system here real quick, but once we do that, if I go up to this window here, we can now dive through the window. So look at that. Now, for the over-under selection, if we go up to, let's say, for example, this one here, I did modify the our standard vault to go up a little bit higher so I can show you. Like in this example, we are doing a vault over, but you would want it to maybe do a slide, or at least have the option to. Well, if we go into our vault mantle selection, add a new element, and For our compare values, we'll add the 2 elements, but for a slide, I recommend doing a value of minimum -10, positive 10 for the min and max. Now, the minimum you can set a little bit more if you would like, depending on your terrain slopes, but I don't recommend setting the max too much higher than 10 because if you do, you might be able to slide uphill. So it's just something to keep in mind is that you don't want to have it be too much offset, but these values tend to work really well. Now, for the length here, I'm not even going to set this to a value. I'm just going to keep this at 0 and let it bypass. But for the action modifications here, primary modification, I'm going to set this to also be enclosed any. And then for the custom or for the montage selection here, we can just go ahead and I have the slide animation. Now, if I go ahead and open this up here just to show you, you can see that we are going to the height point under the root motion here. Now, one thing to point out is I do have ignore z-axis checked. The reason for this is because this will keep the slide across the ground versus accidentally bringing him up a little bit. So by doing this, it'll keep him across the ground, and then we can just find a land target and go to that land target. So we can use this to be able to easily slide under objects, and you can see we're just doing the same thing as always, going from the height, finding a land, going to the land, reset. So if I save, and now with that slide added into our selector here, the main thing to remember is that we set up left control. Whenever we press that button, it's going to set under. However, by default, it's going to be over, and it's also going to reset that over when we release. So if I go up to that slide area and I don't press the left control, you can see it'll do the standard vault. However, if I go over to it and I hold the control button, you can see we are now doing a slide. So we now have 2 different options with the same area here, where it'll choose between a slide or a vault over just purely by a simple change of an input press. So we've got a few different actions here that we can now set up using that modification system. Now, the last thing I'm going to talk about here is going to be something you're only going to use when you really need to change between 2 animations that have the same values of everything, modifications, compare values, and you need something that's going to be an additional check. So if we open up into our character blueprint here and click on the dynamic parkour tray system, under the switches and modifications value, you'll see this custom modification bool array, and we can actually add as many elements to this as we want. Now, this specific Boolean array is actually tied directly into your animation selections. So inside of the Vault Mantle selector, under the action modifications, you can see we have this custom bool modification options. And if we open this up, we have a simple checkbox and then an index. Now, if we check the box, this is just going to indicate that we want to use this action when this value is true. And if we look, we can actually match just those index values from as many as we set. And if we want to make like a change to those values, let's say at runtime, this is going to be a switch between if you do it when you have a gun out or don't have a gun out, or if, varied conditions. If we pull off the parkour tray system and just type in custom bool, and then we get the custom bool mod array, or mod bool array, sorry. And then we're just going to pull off of the array and we can type in set array element or elem, and you'll be able to define the index that you want to set. And then in the item here, we can set to true or false. Now, again, you're going to use these probably a lot less than a lot of the other parts of the system, but just want to point out that this is another way that you can use varied parts of your own code, add this particular code in, and then just set whatever index you want it to be, and then the value you want to represent. So if it's true, then that animation will be selected that matches this index. If it's false, then it will not be selected. This is just another way that you can add things from your own code to be able to modify the way that animation selection is going to occur. But because I don't really have anything on this project to be able to demonstrate that with, it's not really something I can show you, but realistically, it's pretty basic. Like I said, if you just want to work in a Boolean to check a condition inside of your games project, you can just work that, what I just showed you, into that code line, and this will help select different animations. Now, if you're looking to try and get more information on the bool use though, inside of the deep dive videos, I do have some setup that I go through with that, as well as action variation. So I'm just doing this because it's, it's a quick start guide. I don't want to spend too much time talking about extra things, but there's always that additional one if you guys need more information. But that's really it for action modifications. So in the next one, we're going to be taking a look at how to be able to get climbing initiated, getting some climb starts, some jumps and stuff, some basic elements down so that way you guys can get familiar with the climbing system. So I hope to see you guys in that one. But until then, stay tuned, and as always, stay animated.